Fiona Campbell is the winner of our one competition, and they're here tonight to discuss their artist practice. Treating line as an object, Fiona Campbell creates artworks that blur boundaries between sculpture, drawing, and installation. Hybrids that extend line from the plane as 3D form. At the root of her practice is the notion of interconnectedness throughout nature, energy, life cyclical persistence, and transformation. She's interested in tenacity, life lived along lines, a series of interlaced trails. Materiality and process essential. The work is handmade and labour intensive. Fiona's use of recycled and found materials, industrial and inorganic, relates to our relationship with matter, nature, and ourselves. Collecting objects and materials is intrinsic to the process, materials as a message. Always experimenting with a variety of mediums, the juxtaposition of metal, especially steel and copper, is often combined with fragile materials such as paper, textiles, and wax. Increasingly, environmental concerns about human exploitation of nature and overconsumption inform the content. Fiona's recent approach has been a form of suturing, a cathartic attempt to repair in response to world destruction. And with that, I would love to pass you over to tonight's artist, Fiona Campbell.
Thank you very much. I think you've done my talk for me. Okay, I'm going to share screen. Thank you everybody for coming. So can you see that? Okay. Right. So
really good presentation.
Just sort of back to the beginning. So I'm a visual artist. I'm also an educator and a curator, and I'm very passionate about art and nature. And I live and work in Somerset, UK. And my studio is in an outbuilding in my garden. So I work at home most of the time, but I tend to find all sorts of other spaces to work when I need you know, specialist workshops. So I, as Bethan said, my work sort of blurs boundaries between sculpture, drawing, and installation. I also have recently worked in film, and I've dipped into performance. And a lot of my work is within the community. So I sometimes collaborate with, you know, groups of people, other artists, but also community. So yes, my work, it has become increasingly environmental. I probably call myself an artivist, which is I don't know who coined the term, but it's to describe activism through art. And I guess I'm a re-emerging artist. So going back to the beginning of my journey, which has been very wiggly. This was created in 1987. I graduated from Byamshore School of Art in 87, and I continued my sculptural practice for a few years in London, and then I moved to the Southwest. And I restarted my practice after several years teaching and bringing up my son. And so in 2018, I gained an MFA at Bath Spa University. Since then, my work's shifted significantly with a stronger artivist approach. So this is jumping back 30 years. It's Woven Nest, a hybrid inspired by a bird, plant, and nest form. So I was brought up in Kenya, and I've got an umbilical cord to Africa. So art and life there are interwoven. Growing up, I was surrounded by creatures. I used to watch ants, and the colours, forms, and attitudes have permeated my subconscious. A make-and-do approach rubbed off on me. Using what you have around you. Now, trash has become the trope, though it's been going on for centuries in Africa. So in my 20s, my work went through a figurative phase. I learnt processes along the way, like MIG welding. So I learnt to weld at college, but I kind of learnt MIG welding later. And I got very attached to steel for its linear qualities and longevity. So my pieces have, they have a sort of an integral sense of drawing to them. And I've also been influenced by Giacometti. His stick-like figures is the elongated vertical forms, and my work is sort of has that kind of contrast between line and bulbous. I'm also influenced by lots of other artists, but I'll talk about them later. So for about a decade, I created organic forms based on nests, webs, cocoons, and insects. Through its changes, there are threads running through my work. Primal bodily forms, weaving lines, reappropriating materials. I work in quite an intuitive way. Sometimes design comes first, but often materials dictate. I quit my teaching job. Sorry, I'll just move on. Here we are. I quit my teaching job in 2009 and became a full-time artist again. My work was a little more commercial. I often placed work in outdoor sculpture shows, including National Trust estates, and work to commission. So there are different strands to my practice. I work in the community on art projects and workshops. This was a social engagement project I initiated for Glastonbury Festival's Greenfields in 2010. I made the steel structure of a 4.5 meter spider in my garden in sections that could be taken apart. And then at the festival, I invited the public to help make it using recycled cans. So we collected them on site. So the sort of working with the community is about sharing skills and ideas, connecting, and engaging a wider audience, raising awareness in order for changes to take place in society. Conversations flow while making. It's a great enabler and confidence builder. This is the spider when it was finished, reinstalled at Teignmouth, Devon, for a Devon recycled sculpture trail. So you can see it gathered its cans quite significantly. I ran an adult workshop at the Lichen Festival, creating a chameleon with recycled bottle tops and buttons. Some dropped in for half an hour and others stayed throughout. So it was quite fun, all of us working together on the structure, which I had made in advance. And then this is the chameleon exhibited at the National Trust Estate in 2011. So this was for a sculpture trail with the Scraptors. It was a group that I co-founded with 3 others. Okay, so this is Heron. This is also the same sculpture trail. This was quite a large steel, as you can see, it's a heron, but it's all made of scrap steel installed in the lakes. It was quite a challenge to install because the lake was really, really silty. So I had to go into my net to position the base. The legs are sunk about 1 meter deep. So that stayed there for about a month. So this is just work with children, actually. I still work with children. So this is a piece that we all made together at a school. And it was about the plight of the albatross. So albatross chicks are fed by their parents' plastic from the ocean gyres, thinking that they're fish, and then their stomachs bloat and they eventually die, which is really sad. And it disturbed me a lot, and a lot of my work sort of was responding to that, including work with children. So this is in my Green Capital Residency, Big Green Week in 2012 in Bristol. I made a series of works. This stretching figure on the left, sorry, it has quite a long title, so I won't read it. I'm sure you can read it yourself. So it was made out of scrap steel and copper. It's got tree-like elements to it. And the diatoms, here we are, were a series of floating pieces based on microscopic organisms. So they're endangered little, tiny little cellular structures, which are essential to our survival. They produce about over 35% of the world's oxygen. And they're beautiful primal structures hailing back to the Jurassic era, but they're threatened by man's intervention. So I floated them on these rings at the harbour side at the Arnolfini. And this is one with a duck happily sitting on it, which was reinstalled in Somerset for another trail. So I had a solo at Contains Art in Watchet for a programme called Voyages. And I made a series of sort of sea life structures, which were a response to the dramatic decline in coral life, shells and sea creatures, degraded environments, habitats and ecosystems due to our human desire to colonize and capture. So this is a piece called Lichen, and it's all made of reclaimed materials. And this was when my practice started shifting a bit. I installed this in a thing called the Abundance Garden Trail, and I named my project Garden of Eden. So it was 7 meters in kind of in width, certainly. Yeah, kind of mainly width, really. And it was about nature's repossession, all made of found and reclaimed materials, which were transformed into forms reminiscent of lichen, found in the garden which was called Isa Terra. And the garden was a sort of wonderful place where all sorts of creatures were roaming around freely, and it had this wonderful lichen growing on the trees, which is a signifier of pure air. Yeah, it was a suggestion of nature's return to Eden. And the sunlight made the work glow, which was lovely. And as time went on, fungi sprouted through the work. And it's a mix of soft and hard materials, including wool, twine, wire, steel, copper, lead, and they're all, found either on site or around the neighborhood. And this is it reinstalled. I basically reinstalled it in several different places, transfiguring it for different spaces depending on the site. And it was seen at Grow London, where I showed with a gallery called Maureen Michelson, and spotted by Sarah Eberly, who's a garden designer, and that led to a commission, a Chelsea Flower Show commission, which kept me going for the next year. That's a canopy that I made based on the lichen that she saw. So this was created for a garden called the Artisan Mekong Garden, which was sponsored by Viking Cruises at the Chelsea Flower Show in 2016. And it was inspired by traditional fishing and silk weaving in the Mekong River region, mainly recycled materials, including fish bones and feathers and things that were brought back from the Mekong region by Sarah, and I incorporated them into my work. There's a lot of copper. Basically, I created this very large copper net by just weaving and sort of then attaching about 24 squares together to create this big 4-meter piece. The garden won gold and best artisan awards and was seen by lots of people, as you can see on the bottom left. My biggest curated project to date was Stepping Stone. So in 2015, I was awarded Art Council funding for an ambitious project to create site-specific artscapes in Mendip quarries with 14 international artists. And this is one of the series of works that I made. I love working in a team with other artists. I find it very dynamic working together. And so you sort of connect and bounce off each other, which creates a much more exciting project. So it was a multidisciplinary event which linked culture, environment and community, engaging school children, families, adults and passers-by, walkers, etc., in workshops, talks and other events, including day and night events. And we had a young people's design and make competition, and it was in 6 different venues, 3 quarries, an art centre, a museum and a science centre, and spread over 3 stages or steps. That's why it's called Stepping Stone. And this is another piece at the same project called Eviscerated Earth. I'm I'm interested in curating projects that redefine where art can be experienced. So art in unexpected places. On one day, 300 people visited this magical fairy cave quarry to experience the art in the space. Normally no one can enter it. So it's a quarry that has incredible speleotherms. So that's stalactites, etc. But they were destroyed through quarrying. And this piece represents a ghost cave delineating the site where connecting caves existed before they were destroyed. Just going back quickly to the other one, Siri. So Siri was inspired by fossils during an age fertile with crinoids, which are ancient creatures that cling to the bottom of the sea with their tentacles and legs, and they pull themselves along by them. What's going on there? And they're found in limestone rocks exposed in quarries, so vertical old seabeds. Sorry, I've lost my place. I'm half reading. So it was about evolution and how you get similar traits, throughout, from micro to macro, throughout the natural world in animal, mineral, and vegetable creatures, or things rather, phenomena. Okay, so during my MA, I looked at many more contemporary artists. I looked at Philida de Barlow, Belinda de Brucker, Louise Bourgeois, Lee Bull, various others, Cornelia Parker, Art Provera, read more books. It was a chance to experiment and find a deeper meaning in my work. And Matter and Flux was a piece I made in the interim, so halfway through, so I was on a part-time course. And it was an immersive whole room installation. So it was expansive. It was created from found and discarded materials, organic and manufactured, inspired by macroscopic phenomena, especially spiders' webs. So I was exploring connections between line, growth, and energy, and it grew organically within its space as I accumulated materials. So dead, unwanted objects were given a new value through transformation. Dealing with ideas through the poetics of materials, which are in a state of becoming. So I allowed the materials to speak, approaching them as non-hierarchical. And this is Glut. So during this time, my interest in textiles resurfaced. Glut took over 4 months. So it was wrapped, woven, stitched pieces made of found and recycled materials. Many were personal. A lot of it was hand dyed using kind of, things like avocado pits, onion skins, things like that. And it related to consumerism and waste and our plastic oceans and factory farming. And a film called Our Daily Bread by Nicholas Gerholter, which I saw at Housen and Worth, Somerset, which is a cold, hard look at factory farming and really deeply affected me. And obviously mass extinctions. And at the same time, in the same year, my dog died, my lovely boxer dog, which was quite traumatic for me. I was also reading Planet of the Slums by Mike Davis. So this piece is a sort of kind of bringing all of those thoughts together, and the work is I kind of see it as a wailing. So it's seductive and disgusting at the same time. Tentacular entrails are transformed from trash into treasure. So it's about life and death, love and loss, vulnerability and renewal. The process of binding and stitching is a form of suturing. So healing through making, material as message, through doing I found meaning. On soft sculpture, Max Kozloff in 1967 said, soft suggests fatigue. It gives a more human element. The organic, when it becomes a fact of the material, takes on an alarming correspondence to our transient mortality. And softness denotes slumber, calm, flaccid, depleted, and menacing. Right, moving on. And this is accretion. So accretion is an abject object. It's made in layers with intestinal connotations. And I could have made it a lot longer, but I did work on it for a couple of months. So it's a sort of a metaphor for waste and excess and recycling. And I collected materials from what was available around me, basically all sorts of things. It's got hair in it, dust, paper, wire, twine, and it's a bit slimy looking. It's got oil on the top of it. So I was selected to take part in something called Ingritati Palermo, which is a collaborative workshop and exhibition part of the Manifesto in 2018. And what we did together was we explored the canats, which are aqueducts in Palermo. So it's a great opportunity to go abroad and do a project abroad. At the time, Manifesto's theme was the planetary garden, which was a vision where citizens are responsible gardeners taking care of their environment. So I created a kind of a performative piece that was filmed called Gift of Water, and it involved public participation. So I performed repetitive gestures, so of collecting discarded empty water bottles, filling them at the Canat water source, traipsing around the area with a makeshift trolley, which I sort of found. Actually, I paid someone 10 was it euros for? And I approached residents to accept a water bottle to water their plants. And here's a man accepting the water bottle. So it was a way to connect with local residents. And there was an exhibition which was held in a beautiful crypt. And the film's on my YouTube channel if you're interested. So in 2019, I held a residency and solo exhibition in these Victorian cells in Town Hall Arts in Trowbridge. They're amazing. It's an amazing space if you haven't been there. So tongue was part of the exhibition, which I called Offenders, which posed a question: are we all offenders given the state of our world? So flesh, organ, waste, body and violence were sort of key themes. And this tongue was like a big wounded body, which activated the space along with other installations throughout the cells. So it's got different layers to it. It's got all sorts of different fabric. It's got duvets, pillows, cushions, towels, bits of old blanket, all sorts. And so they're layered, and I waxed over a lot of it, and it reflects on the uncomfortable truths about the climate crisis. So this is another exhibition that I co-curated in B Wing in Shepton Mallet Prison in 2019. Snakes and Ladders was created as a site responsive piece for B Wing, which was an ACE funded project, and it involved 8 artists and writers and community events. So these, I created several ladders. I had technical assistance, but they were, some of them were massive. They were kind of ranged from 4 to 7 meters long and spanned 3 floors of this prison wing. It was a decommissioned prison, so there were no prisons there. But it was kind of quite spooky. It's got lots of history about, all sorts of grim history. But some people believe there are ghosts there. It's made, these pieces are made from found wood, just collected, and paper, newspaper, and all sorts of other found materials. And it had to be put together on site, this big one on the left. One of them was suspended. So this one was suspended from the top floor and hung precariously in the center. And it was a sort of reminiscent of flight and extinct animals hung in museums. In contrast, in the other image, you saw sculptural entrails which were dangling from the ladders. So hence the name Snakes and Ladders, which it sort of alludes to the human cycle of striving, greed, suffering and hope. And I was inspired by an artist called Pyre. He did a series of etchings called the Imaginary Prisons series, where you get this sort of never-ending kind of stairways that kind of go across this sort of prison, old ancient prison. As part of that project, there was a bit of community engagement. So here I am with a group of other people. We're creating works for the prison. So within one of the cells, or two of the cells actually, we had work by children there, bound pieces, and then we had work by adults in that one. So it was nice all working together and creating pieces for the cells. They seemed to work quite well, and everybody enjoyed themselves. So this time last year, actually, there was an exhibition called Incendiary, which was, it couldn't happen because of COVID. So I had just created this piece, Pyre, just before COVID sort of came into being, or before we heard about it anyway. And it was in response to the catastrophic Amazon and Australian wildfires. So all of these pieces are bound and charred found objects, which I sort of saw as offerings, kind of grief bundles in remembrance. So again, in a sort of state of sorrow, I just started wrapping and kind of weaving, and it seems to be the way I work when I'm grieving, I guess. So the pieces just gathered and gathered until I made enough. I probably could make far more, actually. It was shown, but just much later. And jumping to this year, actually, this piece I made partly at the end of last year and beginning of this. So it's called The Fall. And I will go back to what I did actually sort of earlier last year in a minute. But I made this, it's just a reflection of our dystopian world using autumn leaves, charred waxed feathers and root forms in steel, found wood and wire. I see it as a drawing in space. So I was reading a book called The Overstory by Richard Powers, and I'm currently reading a book called Life of Lines by Tim Ingold, who talks about how line is the essence of life. And I'm very much into that. So it's really sort of chimes with my own thinking, how lines put out life, and everything's always in flux. And his reference to life's essentials of line and blob align with my interest in line as a way to describe energy. And going back to decades, I was looking at theories about vitalism, which are slightly similar to theories about animism. Okay, so I've got a film, which I'm not going to play the whole thing, because it's 10 minutes, but I thought I'd just play a little bit of it. This is what I got up to last year. So basically, I created a project called Life in the Undergrowth, and it was really just a response to the whole COVID situation. It was obviously a very confusing time. What hit me most was the COVID's zoonotic source, the facts behind why the virus had leapt from animals to humans. And wildlife wet markets are still going on, pesticides are still being used. And it kind of struck me that the Plastic Ocean film, which is now broadcast widely, was presented to the BBC in the 80s, but rejected because it was too disturbing for the populace. Anyway, in isolation, appreciating and attending to nature seemed vital. So Life in the Undergrowth is inspired by hidden worlds that often get overlooked in my garden. And I had a fascination with entangled roots, worms and shoots in upturned turf, which led to experimental responses using to-hand materials and found objects. I drew knotted clumps, dried pond weeds, sun-bleached became paper, handmade tools from natural debris, generated drawings, and sculptures evolved. And I made films. So this is just a little bit. I'm just going to play, a kind of a sort of taster. So I'm going to stop it because I think that's about halfway through. And if you want to see the rest, you could go on my YouTube channel. It's on show at in Frome at the Black Swan Arts as well. And just to go back about the nails, I basically was digging to make space for a studio bay, which I still haven't finished. And I kept finding a glut of old rusty nails as I was digging. So I used those in my work, which was amazing. It was sort of like finding treasure each time I dug. But I was also selling my soil locally because I was broke last year, and it was kind of weird. It was like a circular economy. I was sort of digging, selling the soil, using the soil, gardening, finding nails, and it was quite an interesting sort of cyclical thing. And later on, there's some sad parts. So I was sort of communing with small creatures, witnessing transformation, life and death, and it was quite emotional. And encounters between myself, garden as site and nature helped me form a stronger bond with all that comes and goes. And now I'm working on a project called Inch by Inch, which is an artist-led project, which I will play a little bit of. It is a titchy film. But basically, it's a traveling project going around the southwest in a sort of spiral, and I'm creating quite a large piece in a trunk. That's my studio. There we go. And that's the end. I've got an Instagram channel, but I think Ryan's kindly going to pop that in the chat. So that's me. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. It's so amazing to see your journey as an artist, like start to like now, and how much your practice has developed. I think it's so fascinating to see. So I've got a few questions to ask you, and then I'm going to open out to anyone else. So feel free to put questions into the chat or raise your hand and I'll be able to unmute you as well. So obviously nature and the environment is such a massive theme throughout your practice, and kind of wanting to, I guess, help save the environment in a way. Do you think that art can really help make that change?
I think art's got an emotional sort of power to it. And I think if we reach people emotionally, it's more likely to affect them. So I guess the more sort of art, I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to do art about that, but the more it says the same kind of a message, I think the more it just seeps into everybody's consciousness, and it creates discussion, which I think is really important. When people sort of talk about things, I think the connections actually then come to the front of our brains. So, and yeah, it's hope, I hope, yeah.
So obviously there's been a lot of collaboration for you as well, and people being involved in your practice. Is this important to you as an artist, that people do take part in the work, and if so, why is it important?
Do you mean with general public or other artists, or a bit of both?
They're both, really, yeah.
I just think everybody's got a creativity in them, and I love bringing that out of people. So I just sort of get joy from that. I think when people work collaboratively, it's slightly going back to what I was saying about connecting. The connections and conversations come about, which are quite important, and they it's a two-way flow, isn't it? I might inspire them, but they would inspire me too. So I think collaborating is wonderful. I think I like the balance of sometimes just working solo, quietly on my own, and sometimes I like working with others for that quite dynamic energy that happens when you've got different artists and different thinking, and it comes together. Yeah.
So I've had a question sent from someone who couldn't make it to your talk tonight, but they wanted to know, so you work quite frequently the colour red or different shades of red. What is it about reds that you are interested in?
Very good question. Red is the colour of Louise Bourgeois, I'm thinking of, and a fellow artist called Lou Baker quotes, it's the colour of so many things that are quite sort of strong and powerful. Obviously blood, for starters. We relate it to love, we relate it to anger. It's all the sort of strong emotions. I mean, obviously there are other colours with strong emotions, but I think it's, a bit like, I called glut because it is a sort of slight play on all sorts of words like gut, and gluttony, obviously, but it just had to be red. I didn't really think of anything else. It's actually, for that, I'm referring to that particular piece. Well, it's like lumps, it's like meat, isn't it? Lumps of flesh. I'm very drawn to red, but I'm working in yellow a lot at the moment.
So we've got loads of questions coming in from everyone watching. So we've got one in the chat here, which is from Jill. It says, thank you, Fiona. So many interesting aspects to your work. I wondered where you source your materials, and if you get materials first and these initiate thoughts for a piece, or do designs for a piece come first and you then try to collect relevant materials?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Jill. I get my materials from all sorts of places. I've had lots of lovely donations recently. People sort of now know that I'm a bit of a scrounger, so I get lots of wire cables given to me, and I strip them and get the copper inside. And I go to scrap yards I've got a nice friendly one in Pill locally, and I find I kind of, when I go on walks, I pick up stuff, so natural materials as well as, you know, bits of twine that are just sort of lying around doing nothing. Where else do I get my materials? Scrap stores, you know, often donated, and reusing just old stuff that I've got around. I'm a bit of a hoarder. I have actually got a scrapyard in my garden at the back. So I kind of, you know, collect over the years and then just go and look in my scrapyard. And in terms of whether that comes first, yeah, often, sometimes, certainly with things like Pyre, that piece, you know, the collecting was as important as the making, and the collecting inspired the making. So it was sort of a two-way thing. And sometimes I do design, you know, like those earlier pieces, sort of like the heron in the lake. And that was, I knew what I wanted to make. And then I went looking for pieces that looked a bit like those shapes.
So we've got Ryan's got his hand up.
There we go. Forgot where the unmute button was. Thank you, Fiona. I absolutely love your work, and the very important message that seems to run through. I just wanted to ask about the scale of the work. You mentioned like the micro and the macro, but I wanted to know if your sculptures, does the size, do you ever have like a rough idea, or does it just sort of grow as you're making? And is it a fundamental part of your work? Does it really affect the meaning behind an individual piece?
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan, for that nice compliment. Scale, gosh, it's funny because at the moment I'm working on a project where almost everybody else is working quite small, and that's the point. It was to make something transportable in a case, but I just couldn't help but work in the biggest case I could find, which was a trunk, and then make work that could fold into the trunk but comes out, so it's expands. And I think it's because I'm into this business of expansiveness and there never being an end to things. There's no edge to stuff, you know, it just keeps on going. Life keeps on continuing. It's massive, you know, world is massive. But then again, I absolutely love the tiny microscopic things in life as well. So, you know, I adore looking at tiny things, you know, looking at, I created a little film once called Spiderweb Safari, and it was just, you know, this tiny, minuscule little tiny things that you can't see with your real eye were crawling around and doing their own thing in this little jungle, miniature jungle. So in terms of making things, I don't know, I would like to try and make things small. Tessa Farmer, an artist I really admire, she makes amazingly tiny, gorgeous pieces, but I'm not sure that it's, no, I think I'm a bit too, I don't know. Things do grow, yes, they grow. And I suppose on the whole, I have a scale that I'm trying to work to, but it doesn't always work out like that.
Thank you.
So we have a question in the chat from Polly, and it says, very interesting. Where do you store your pieces once exhibitions are over? Do you dismantle and reuse the elements? I love the stories behind each piece and the way you reacted to spaces. And William Scholl also has a comment on around the same lines, saying, I also am curious about the storage of works, especially those who found objects or trash to treasure, as when I do large or found object work, I just have no idea where to put it afterwards. I love how your work uses medium to add to its emotional impact.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Yeah, it's a real bane where you put your work. I'm very lucky. I've got quite a big garden. I've got a very small cottage, but quite a big garden, and my studio is a bit tight. So what I do is I have makeshift sheds and things. I made this funny canopy thing for those ladders. They're just stored out really outside, but with a canopy over them. So they're unfortunately open to the elements. So if, you know, I will probably have to redo them if that ever has to be put anywhere again. And I do reuse work, yes. I find it quite hard to sort of tear into an old piece and just totally dismantle it until I feel it's so tired it really does. It's crying out for it. So I kind of I put them in my garden basically. But if they're indoor pieces, I mean, for example, Glut takes up part of my studio space, which is not that big, on the wall. I just hang it there and it just sits there with plastic over it. You know, it has to be protected. And yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't know what to say. I think you just need a massive, great big, huge barn space for it, but I don't have one.
So Carmela's got their hand up.
Hi Fiona, I just wanted to say I love your work, but I really particularly love your MA work, and I too myself am a materials-based artist. So I was just curious to ask the question, do you have a particular material that is your favourite, or like a combination of favourite materials?
I do, thank you. Yes, thank you for that. I do. I can't get away from copper wire for some reason. I don't know whether it's something maybe I should get away from, but because I'm doing all this sort of wrapping and weaving, this sort of process that I can't also get away from, wire is really good to hold stuff. So I tend to use that with, I suppose, wire and twine maybe are my favorite things that I use quite a lot, you know, because you can get different colored twine. Quite like it when it's a bit manky. So yeah, copper's great because it's quite malleable, you know, and you can do so much with it, and you can solder it and everything rather than steel wire.
And I also wanted to ask, with the process, they're quite lengthy processes and they're quite manual and hands-on. What is your thinking behind the process when you're making? There's a lot of time that's put into this making. Like, what do you think about when you're making?
Do you know, sometimes I think it's just a way to relax myself. Sometimes I think that actually I make these long-winded pieces because it's a way for me to get centered. It's sort of almost I mean, it's not just therapy. I mean, I'm thinking about the things that they're about, but not always. I just love that sort of that endless thing where you get into a zone. It's sort of it's almost, you're kind of in a slight trance, bit like dancing sometimes, you know. I don't know, it's just, it's a slow dancing with your hands. Yeah, trancing. It's just, yeah. I can't really explain it. Yeah.
Do we have any last questions from anyone in the audience? Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, yes.
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
It's fine.
Hi Fiona, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Loved your presentation. I think working with found objects is such an interesting thing, and I was just wondering if there's anything that you found that was particularly surprising to you when you found it, or something that's memorable that you've found that you've used in sculpture.
Gosh. Oh, I mean, all I can think of right now is a blackbird that's still sitting in my porch waiting for the moment when it's going to be used in a piece of work, but I don't really know what to do because I don't necessarily want to put it in Pyre. Pyre's already got a couple of things like that. So there's that. I think I'll just leave it at that one, which is quite a sad one, isn't it? But yeah.
I shall look out for that one. That'll be an interesting one to work with. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, if anyone is struggling putting their hand up, because I know some Zoom accounts don't have that feature, feel free, just put the word hand in the chat and I'll come over to you. But we've got a question from William.
Yes. Can you hear me? I just unmuted myself, so okay. I noticed that some of the works, like the albatross work, was inspired by pollution's impact on albatross ecology. So I was wondering, because it seems like a lot of these works are inspired by sort of the natural world and ecological sciences, if any of the works you're doing sort of works in the other way, where then they inspire you to look more into ecology and sciences, or if it is more of a back and forth between working on an art project and then the way the natural world inspires you to look into ecological sciences as well.
Wow, good question. So you're asking if the artwork is making me look at the ecology more. Is that what you're saying? Asking?
Yeah, because with some of your pieces, you can see there's a clear link between what is going on in the natural world and your artwork. So I was wondering if it's also like the other way, where sometimes your artwork will make you want to look more into what's going on in the natural world.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly with the diatoms, I guess it made me investigate it more as I was making it. But yes, I mean, it's a good question. I probably should ponder that one a bit more. Look, do more studying of things that I'm interested in. I mean, I did try to go to the science department when I was doing the spider, when I was doing that big matter and flux piece, the big drawing in space, and tried to sort of learn a bit more about the microscopic world, and learnt to use all this sort of microscopic equipment, but I think it was still a little bit more visual than scientific, my investigations. So yes, it's a good question, and it does make me want to. I don't always have the time to, but it's certainly something that I need to think about a bit more.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming, and thank you so much to Fiona for joining us today to talk about her practice. All the links to Fiona's website and Instagram page have been put into the chat right now. Thank you everyone for coming. You can find us over on our website, roundlemon.co.uk, where you can come and visit more events like this. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter at round_lemon, and we're also on Facebook. And we hope to see you at more of our future events.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.